Hi, everyone. Welcome to Disco's first AI Upskilling Podcast. We are thrilled to have our first guest, Sean Morris, with us. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks. It's exciting to be here.
Great. So for all those that don't know me, I'm Candice Faktor, co-CEO and co-founder of Disco, and we are an AI-powered social learning platform. And I couldn't think of a better guest to start with than Sean Morris, one of our amazing customers at Disco, who is doing phenomenal work when it comes to learning and AI, and is somebody who has a lot of thought leadership that I'm excited for him to share on this space. So for those of you who don't know, Sean has been working in digital pedagogy for over 20 years. He is currently VP of Academics at Course Hero. And he has an amazing background looking at digital pedagogy and working in a number of institutions. Sean, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Sean, I'd love for this audience for you to share a bit more about your history and background in digital pedagogy. I know you are one of the very early contributors to the research in this field, and so I'd love for you to share your wisdom with our audience.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been doing work in and around digital pedagogy for about 22 years. And it really first started actually shortly after grad school. I've been teaching as a grad student in classrooms, and I got a job teaching at a fully online community college setting. And the first thing that struck me was I have no idea who my students are. I have no idea how to reach them. I don't know if they're enjoying class or getting something from what I'm doing. And so immediately I recognized there was a need for a sort of a more in-depth digital pedagogy, something to really consider and theorize the practices that were best for this sort of thing. There were already existing instructional design principles, and I had been an instructional designer before, so I knew of those. But I had spent my graduate years studying critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire's and bell hooks and Henri Giroux, those sort of folks who do critical pedagogy, and thinking through how do you really elevate students so that they're able to be contributors to their own education, that they're producing knowledge, not just taking in knowledge. And so when I went online, I started theorizing this and trying to figure this piece of it out. My colleague and I, Jesse Stommel, we founded a journal called Hybrid Pedagogy that really cultivated an audience of educators who were curious about this and wanted to theorize it too. So we had this online journal that we were doing that with. That then grew into Digital Pedagogy Lab, which was a global event that focused on the same kinds of issues and really focusing on humanizing digital pedagogy. And how do we do that? How do we teach through a screen rather than to a screen? What are the problems and affordances with digital technology and in learning and that sort of thing? So we really worked on that a lot. And then I've worked at various universities, Middlebury College, University of Mary Washington in Virginia, the University of Colorado here in Denver, and then very recently about 3 years ago, moved to Course Hero to do work with outreach to educators trying to help them understand how to teach with technology.
I think it's no surprise that we found each other in that context, because the whole premise of Disco is we don't believe that learning should be done alone, right? We believe that learning together and learning with each other and having instructor-led, live-led, peer-led, project-led learning is how people actually are able to get a transformation. So I'm so honored to be talking to you because your background is so relevant to much of the founding principles of why we started Disco. What's fascinating, as I'm sure, and why we're having this chat is that this new wave of disruption and revolution has entered the world at large, and certainly the learning landscape, which is AI. And I think what I know this audience is really, really interested in is, with all your extensive background in educational technology, how are you envisioning the future of online learning evolving both in the next year, but then in the next 5 years?
So that's a great question, big question. And I think I'm actually going to wait to talk about AI because I think that there's something more important to address here. 3 years on since we started returning to offices and classrooms, seems like we shouldn't still have to talk about the pandemic, but we do, because the impact to education, and especially online education, is still very much being felt. I remember being asked by a reporter back in 2020, when we all pivoted online, if I thought that it meant good things for online learning. And my answer was actually just the opposite. The state of online learning in 2020 was pretty terrible. If I'm honest, the focus of online education was on learning outcomes. It was on grades, it was on standardization, or it was focused on verisimilitude, trying to make online teaching and learning mimic classroom teaching and learning, when they're decidedly very different beasts. This focus on making things the same led to the adoption of some pretty questionable practices, including online proctoring, attendance taking on Zoom, and a fair number of other practices that really didn't acknowledge students were learning in very different circumstances online than those in classrooms. And what happened during the pandemic, and I'm sure I'll get your question soon, is that now this pretty terrible online education suddenly became widespread. So teachers who never taught online before were treated to a whole host of unproductive best practices that mostly alienated students, that aimed to make learning as efficient as possible, and essentially set up penalties for students learning from home who couldn't behave like they were in a classroom, which was most students. Unfortunately, today, not a lot has changed. We got out of the pandemic and we moved on. And not a lot of attention was paid to what went wrong with online learning. It was easier to blame COVID. What is different now, though, is that students, and to some extent teachers, have learned that learning can be done remotely and in a way that lets them balance the rest of their lives. I think going forward, we'll see more and more students learning online, and to accommodate that pedagogically, we're going to need to adapt the way we teach, because learning is a social activity. As we've already talked about this being important in the community. We need to find ways to build communities online, and we need to learn to trust community-driven learning. I guess by which I mean learning that values and fosters collaborative intelligence, peer support, emergent outcomes, and emergent outcomes that reflect the production of knowledge and not just its transfer. And we will, of course, need platforms that support that kind of learning and teaching. And with the right platforms and with the right professional development for teachers, I think we can get away from the sort of efficiency model of online learning and move towards something that's truly productive, truly engaging, and that actually grows student agency and confidence.
I think that's so beautifully put, and it's really music to my ears, because we saw the same thing, right, in COVID. It's actually like truly disco is a COVID baby, right? It was born in the pandemic. It was born because we looked around and we said, wait a second, we don't learn well in the consumption mode of what most learning platforms offer. We want to have agency. We want to have collaboration. And I don't know if you know this, but the root word for disco in Latin actually means learn. And it's the root word for all the things they're talking about: discussion and discourse and discovery. I definitely agree with you. And I think the two other things I would add to your prediction is we got to talk about the economics of learning and the affordability, the accessibility, the sustainability of the ability for many people in this world to actually go be live in real life in a classroom. It is a huge privilege to be able to do that, and it truly is unaffordable to many people. I agree. I think that's a really astute point. Let's think about the next 5 years. Where does your mind go in terms of the next 5 years, or anything else you would add on the future evolving?
I think I would like to be hopeful about the next 5 years. I would like to be hopeful about it.
We like hope at Disco. That's great.
The work that I did for so long, and the work that I've even done while I've been a course hero, has been really focused on helping teachers figure out technology so that basically technology can get out of the way and they can connect with their students. My hope all along for those 20 years and going forward has been that teachers will be able to adopt pedagogies that will help them with those connections. I really start to paint the future. When we're talking about ed tech, we tend to focus on the technology. How's the technology going to change? This is the whole conversation around AI right now, right? How is the technology going to change everything? I'm less interested in that than I am, how are the people going to change everything? We, at least in the States right now, education is being challenged by some low enrollment. We, of course, have a national dialogue about the value of education. And I think that these sorts of challenges are very human ones that need to be dealt with by humans in their classrooms, in meeting rooms, in sessions with their teachers, with administrators, and really start focusing in on what is it that education does? What is it that education needs to do? And when we're faced with these sort of challenges that educational technology continues to put in our classrooms, we have to keep coming back to those questions. What is it that we do? What is it that humans do? What is it that education is really about? So I don't know that I have any solid predictions for the next 5 years, but what I would hope for is in the next 5 years, as we see educational technology and especially AI begin to rapidly evolve, that on the other side of it, we can see humans and slow down and say, what are we doing? Why is education so important?
I think that's a really great point. And I think you're talking to my next question, which is the role of educators changing as AI becomes more prevalent. And, what I'm hearing you say is we're actually going to allow the humans to be more human, potentially, in a hopeful way. But any other thoughts on how the role of educators will change as AI becomes more available in platforms to do different elements of work? Or what work do you think the AI is going to do and the humans are going to do as it relates to education?
Yeah. So I need to tread a little bit carefully here because I know that Disco has recently incorporated some AI functionality into the platform. And of course, I work for a company very invested in AI. But let me start off by saying that what's become more and more important to me over the last year or so is resisting this dominant conversation that insists that AI adoption is or should be compulsory. I think AI is cool. I admit it's fun to watch it do its thing. I don't know if there's any studies out there on this, but I'd be surprised if there's not a kind of dopamine hit that happens when AI spits out something so logical, so believable, and it does so easily. It's like watching magic, right? It's like watching a magician do sleight of hand. The whole conversation, though, about AI being compulsory is largely fueled by AI companies and their evangelists, and not by teachers who are actively dealing with this technology's presence in the classroom. So the truth is, I don't really see the role of educators changing much because of AI. To me, this isn't unlike when laptops and cell phones showed up in classrooms or when people found ways to teach using social media. There are uses for technology. There are pedagogical uses for technology. There's ways to make technology a platform for human discovery and for knowledge production. And that's essentially the argument that I made for 20 years while I was actively in education. But on the other side of that argument is that educational technology is designed with some very particular and rather robotic ideas about how learning happens. Right. And so when it comes into the classroom, it tends to demand that pedagogies change to fit the machine. And what we need are more teachers participating in the production of educational technology. And this is actually something that Course Hero is working on, involving teachers directly in new product development. It's also super important to me that teachers remember that they have agency when it comes to technology, whether that's social media, whether that's learning management system, or whether that's AI. If I hope to see any change in the role of educators as a response to AI, it would be for them to become more confident in their pedagogies, clearer in their relationships with students, and more trusting of the humans they teach rather than the algorithms through which that teaching can sometimes be translated.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. And maybe the next question is really around what are the key challenges and opportunities you foresee in 2025 in particular for the integration of AI, both in the learner experience. And I'd love for you to talk both from, obviously you're dealing with K through 12, right, in terms of that audience, but really also in adult education, in the professional development world, because I think it's different would be my sense. But tell me a bit more about what are the key challenges and opportunities in 2025 with the integration of AI for the learner and the administrator.
To be clear, of course, here my audience, and actually my audience all along, has been primarily higher ed. So I have mostly dealt with adult learners and or learners directly out of high school who are considered adults. But so to get to your question in terms of key challenges and opportunities, I think that there's, and we've talked about some of the challenges already, but I want to focus first on opportunities, actually. And I'm going to be a little bit theoretical here because that's just how I lean. But I always look at technological advances as platforms for us humans to focus again and again on what makes us human. I think technology can sometimes feel like a reason to purge all that we used to be in favor of this new thing that's now in front of us. But I think we sacrifice a much deeper understanding of our humanity when we do that. So this grass that we're on right now may be greener, but we grew up on the other grass. It's what made us strong. It's what made us agile. And it also fed our imagination and our curiosity, which is what drove us to the new grass, right? I think that's maybe the most important opportunity that AI presents. The opportunity to recognize we made AI. It didn't make us. It learned from us, not the other way around. And it's trying to imitate us, to be more like us, because what we've got going on is pretty remarkable. The biggest opportunity in front of us is not to say, ooh, this cool new shiny thing, but to say, okay, now what? Because curiosity and asking questions has driven the evolution of the human mind for millennia. And there's simply no reason to stop with AI. What's weird, and what's probably the biggest challenge that learners and administrators will face with AI, is that AI purports to answer our questions, to solve our curiosities. And we have to make sure that the way it's implemented or adopted leaves plenty of room for continuing to ask questions, for continuing to explore, to work together to pose and solve problems, which is that community-driven learning that we've been talking about. AI, more than any other technology before it, looks like a solution. Not a solution to a problem that we have, but to the questions we have. The sort of arithmetic of human curiosity and imagination. How we put it into our schools or businesses should complicate rather than simplify our engagement with knowledge and life.
I really love that quote because I think what you're saying is it's easy to think there is an answer, right? When it comes to AI answers being so available. But really that the whole quest for human advancement and growth and development is the continued asking of deeper questions. And so I really love that. And I really appreciate that perspective. So let's talk about Course Heroes AI Academy. I want to first of all say we're so honored and privileged that you run this on Disco. So we're delighted to have you as a customer. And I also want to congratulate you for your recent award for this amazing program. I believe you won the Anthem Award, which highlights the critical role educators play in shaping the future of learning. So tell us a bit more about your approach to building this academy, whatever you want to share with this audience, any lessons learned along the way, and why you think you won this award.
Okay, great. Yes, I think that in terms of our approach to AI Academy, when AI hit a couple years ago, everyone went reeling, right? No one knew what to do about it. Everyone was either invested in it, scared of it, whatever. And we saw all these huge conversations happening amongst educators without any kind of platform for that to happen, those sorts of discussions to happen. So what we wanted to do was create an opportunity for educators to come together to learn from each other. Because my feeling is that if education has problems, its solutions lie with its people. And so here was AI, this big thing that no one understood really, and how it was going to impact education. So I thought, let's bring teachers together. Let's find a community-based platform where they can actually exchange ideas, learn from each other, create some of that collaborative intelligence around this, solve the problems themselves. So we did bring in like guest speakers and that sort of thing, but those guest speakers tended to be people who were asking questions, who were exposing people to new ideas, rather than saying, here's how you do this thing. And we didn't want the here's how you do this thing. We wanted instead an open field for people to just explore, ask questions, discover, share their discoveries, and co-create what comes next for AI. So that was the approach that we really took to AI Academy. And I'll be honest, when we found Disco, it was the perfect platform for it. I'm not supposed to endorse anybody else's product as an executive at Course Hero, but I will say it was really the perfect product for us. And it provides enough flexibility of design that we can go in there and do what we want to with it. but also it provided the opportunity for educators to, how do I want to say this? I think I mentioned before that we need platforms that we need technology that kind of gets out of the way. And I feel like Disco does that. It provides a really great forum for people to come together and just be able to do that knowledge production together without having to worry about how do I do this in the technology and getting so distracted by it. It felt very natural for us.
That's awesome. And how would you think about the impact of the program? What did you think about as your metrics for impact? And in all seriousness, I am so impressed that you won this award. Like maybe for the audience, just helping people understand what was it about the program that was recognized?
Metrics were actually very participant focused. So we wanted to make sure that people felt like they actually learned something. We wanted to make sure that people felt like they were satisfied and that they felt like they had established some sort of connection with the community. So we actually did a survey at the beginning and at the end of the course to say, what's your level, essentially, what's your comfort level with AI? What are your thoughts about AI? And then at the end, what's your comfort level? What's your thoughts? And what we saw was a significant increase, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, and I really should, but a significant increase in confidence in using AI, a significant increase in people who felt that they would now be able to incorporate AI into their classroom. We also saw a decrease in people who said AI was for cheating or just for plagiarism. We saw a decrease in people around that. We felt like people were more confident in being able to handle the ethics around AI. And then we also just wanted to know if they're satisfied. So we just asked about their satisfaction, and the score was very high. It was 96, 98%
Wow.
in terms of satisfaction. But what was most meaningful for us was watching how the learning progressed and how people felt more and more confident in being able to deal with this, because they were coming in, especially the first time we offered this in fall of 2023, they were coming in completely unaware, not really scared generally. And they were leaving feeling much stronger and more confident.
Amazing. Huge kudos. We're delighted to see the success you had and to have somebody with your background in history and digital pedagogy that's so aligned with the intention of the platform, and then to see the result is like truly a gift. Delighted. Now, I love what you're saying, because I think where really people are struggling and really interested in thinking about this idea of human connection and balancing that with the use of AI tools. So do you have some practical advice for how learning admins, facilitators, designers should be thinking about the balance, or how to use AI tools with the desire and need to have authentic human connection?
Right now in the conversation, but I do want to point out there's an underlying assumption in the question you just asked, and that is that AI is going to be around. It's going to be present, or at least it's going to be a factor in facilitation. It's going to supplement or interrupt human connection. And I just want to, because it's my own agenda right here, I just want to double down on that AI isn't always there. It doesn't need to be the devil or angel on our shoulder advising us how to engage with our lives or learning and teaching or with the world. Now, that said, when AI tools are present and when we have decided to include them in the learning process, I think we need to give them the appropriate seat in the room. And what do I mean by that? But I think, so I'm sure you've heard the shorthand teaching philosophies, sage on the stage, guide on the side. And as inelegant a job these do to describe the role of the teacher, they cleverly situate the teacher in relationship to students. Is the student dispensing wisdom from the front of the room, or are they hanging out nearby and letting students drive the learning? If I were going to situate AI in the classroom in a similar way, and I wish I could come up with a clever rhyme for it, but I'd probably put it in the student's pocket. Now, with AI apps, that can be very literal, but I mean figuratively to some extent. I wouldn't put AI on the desk. I wouldn't put it on the side or on the stage. I certainly would not put it in any position that a teacher might occupy. But I also wouldn't superimpose it on the student either. We've already said learning is a social activity. It's been a social activity since before we had language. We've always learned from each other, and that shouldn't change. AI can be a pretty nifty helper, and it can get us from A to C when we're stuck at B. But it shouldn't stand in for a human being when a human being is available. And I know what I just said there, and the availability of humans can be complicated these days. which is another topic altogether. But for AI, I guess like a calculator, I'd put AI in the pocket where it can't advise on the human relationships that drive learning, but it can be there as a supplementary tool.
It's a really interesting perspective. I know it's already 1:28 and I have a bunch of questions here and we have some great audience questions. So I'm going to just go really fast because I want to get to a couple of these. What do you think is the role of AI for personalizing learning experiences?
Okay. Personalized learning. It seems like every new technological tool wants to solve this problem, right? The personalized learning holy grail. And I do absolutely love the idea that learning paths could be so deeply customized as to be personalized, or that a student could potentially, with the support of an advanced AI, learn not only at their own pace, but driven by the connections they make rather than those dictated by the curriculum. I am a proponent of Freire's idea that students should be the subjects of the education process and not its objects. So the idea of a student in the driver's seat is pretty appealing. But I'll be honest, I don't think we're there yet. And one reason is what I've said already before. One reason is that technology isn't generally made by teachers. And these are people who really understand how learning happens outside of best practices, outside of learning science. That sort of complicated, surprising process that so often just feels like luck. And I think that with all the diversity of experience and knowledge, ability, identity, access, psychology, spirituality, all of the students bring, there's no sort of one method that can encompass them all. And so I don't think there's an AI that can do that either. But I do think, and we're going to get back to this community-driven learning, I think the solution to personalized learning is actually community-driven learning. And I saw this happen in AI Academy. I know I keep bringing this up, but in a community where knowledge production is shared, where every individual has the ability to carve out their own path through learning and to contribute their discovery to the community, I think that's where we get personalized learning. I don't think we need technology to do this, unless, of course, it's that technology is a platform that facilitates community-driven learning. Yeah, and that was the philosophy that we took into AI Academy, and I think that a lot of people experience something very close to personalized learning in that space.
I love that. So my last question for you is, when you think about advice that you can give based on this amazing program that you've run and many years of digital pedagogy, when companies are looking to adopt AI tools, how can you help these organizations think about this adoption of AI tooling aligning with the principles of critical pedagogy? What advice would you have for how they should be thinking about that? And I think you've answered in a few different places, but is there anything else you would share as it relates to that?
To answer the question, we first need to understand that critical pedagogy, above all else, is about developing critical consciousness in oneself. Critical consciousness is about seeing the world both as it really is and not the way that it's told to us, and also as it could be otherwise. Critical pedagogy always resolves in action and reflection, both of which are undertakings that AI isn't capable of. So I would say that any institutions looking to adopt AI technologies and who want to foster critical consciousness should ask themselves every step of the way, how will this technology help? And how will this technology stand in the way? Now, I hear again and again that AI shouldn't be used as a crutch, which is terribly ableist language. But if we're going to use that metaphor, I think we need to inspect why we think students are hobbled. Who is telling us that? Why are we so prone to believe it? And if we believe it about them, what do we believe about our own capacity to get along in this world without or with AI? I just really think we need to be asking those sorts of questions.
Very, very helpful. If I was to play, not really devil's advocate, I just have one more question here. I do have a question, and you can say we can come to this later, which is more about, is there a word, like what would need to be true in order for AI to be able to not be in the way of this critical pedagogy? Or do you feel that's just not ever going to be the case? Or do you feel it's where the technology is at today?
No, I think, so to put a frame around this, educational technology includes everything from a blackboard to online technology to AI. And I have a friend, Audrey Waters, who argued at one point that educational technology includes locks on doors, for example. So all kinds of things that we have had to incorporate into education for various reasons. All of those things are fine. Now, not entirely. There's obviously problems. There's lots of problems with AI, like there's environmental problems, there's bias problems, et cetera. But essentially, when we're in that environment, the important piece of critical pedagogy is, what's your environment? Where are you living? What is your world looking like? So it isn't so much that critical pedagogy wants to do away with, and that's actually where, when my friend Jesse and I would talk about critical digital pedagogy, was the idea that we need to think about, how does critical pedagogy and digital technology fit together? And the idea is, what are the conversations we're having about it? And never forget, education doesn't belong to technology. It belongs to people. And so that's this, as long as we have that attitude and we bring that attitude into any conversations we have about it, I think that we can come up with some really great solutions and really great ways of incorporating technology into education. But we need to have those conversations for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'm going to turn it over to the awesome audience questions. So first question is from Rena. And I think she was interested in, are we talking about adult education or K through 12? And how do you think that differs? Because adult learning seems to be a very different ballgame from K through 12 when it comes to technologies.
Sure. And yes. So I'll say really quickly, I'm not an expert in K-12, but I've raised a kid and I've seen the impact of technology on them. And I think that with K-12, like, there just needs to be more understanding of helping students adjust to new technologies that are coming in, figure out what their role is. I think that if a parent or a teacher needs to say, no cell phones in class until you're in the 8th grade, or whatever that rule may be, then that's okay, as long as they've got some sort of pedagogical reason for it. I know that right now there's a whole cell phone debate going on because of the book, The Anxious Generation. But I think that we need to be very considerate about what the role is that technology should or can play with children. This is where I'm a Luddite. I think children should play with each other. I think children should get outside. I think children should, I'm not dead set against screen time, but I think that children need to have that social interaction as they're growing up, for sure. I think as adults, what's interesting about adults is that they are faced with such complicated problems. Something like social media, for example, can become a panacea if you're having a terrible day. And we all have terrible days. Some of us have many terrible days, right? And if you're having terrible days and you're also trying to go to school, then a distraction or an AI or whatever else might help you just get through. So I think that we need to be thinking about these as, especially with adult humans, as little kids are human too, but adult humans, I think we need to be thinking about this as from that very relational aspect of, what is it that people are going through in their adult lives? And what are they facing? Are they facing food scarcity? Are they facing housing insecurity? Are they taking care of their elderly parents? Are they doing all of these other things and also trying to go to school? In which case, you know what? AI giving me some answers because it's midnight and I need to finish my homework looks pretty appealing. The only way to mitigate that, if we don't want them using AI for answers, is to talk to the people, adjust our policies, figure out ways to make it possible for them to do their work on their own. So I think I'm not a big fan of the whole andragogy field, because I think that people learn in very much the same ways from children to adults, but adults are facing very different obstacles.
I think that's a really good point. The last question we have is from Greg Jones. So thanks, Greg. And it relates to workplace learning. He says, I see a lot of silos and individual knowledge never growing into institutional knowledge. How do you envision the use of platforms like Disco and Course Hero helping to utilize social learning as a way to bridge these gaps and foster a culture of collaborative knowledge sharing?
I think that part of the problem, and I absolutely agree with Gregory, I think the part of the problem is that those silos form around specific training situations, right? We'll go to a profession, like part of my team will go to professional development, and then they come back and they might share some of what they learned, but no one else on the team went to that conference or that workshop or whatever, so they didn't learn together. I've recently been exploring this idea of, again, community-driven learning, but in a very open space, so that essentially everyone is invited in to explore topics that are relevant to their work and then share with each other in those community spaces. So it isn't necessarily like, here's a workshop that's going to take 2 days and then you're going to go home and forget most of it. But rather, here's an existing learning community that's happening constantly at work that is injected with different topics and different kinds of expertise and different opportunities to explore. And then that just becomes you end up having a company full of experts who could then share with each other that knowledge. So this is something I've been exploring lately and trying to think through, like, how can I bring that to my team, for example? How do I begin to bring that to Course Hero? But I definitely see that as part of the solution. It's just breaking down those silos, putting everyone in the community and saying, here's what we're learning.
Yeah. I love that you're bringing that up, and I can certainly answer from Disco's perspective. It's actually been really interesting because we didn't start off thinking that Disco would be a platform used internally in enterprises. It was much more like an academy platform externally, until we realized that every organization is a community. And actually, really what we need is exactly this. It's, instead of silo-based knowledge, you do want to have collaborative spaces that allow people to learn with each other together. And what our belief at Disco is that AI is going to help network knowledge, right? Like, it's going to actually create a network knowledge base. So it can even point you to who in this community knows what knowledge, so that you can actually go and have more human connection and engagement with that person. And you may be able to get the start of topics, conversations. Like, it is in alignment with what you're saying, Sean. It's a way to support more human learning as opposed to replace the humans in the learn. Because I think the philosophy is that learning is not often unto itself. It's a means to an end. And that means to an end often is connecting with other humans. So I think that's, or knowing how to connect with those other humans. That is definitely how we're thinking about collaborative knowledge sharing at Disco.
That's great. That's really great. Love to hear it. That's fantastic.
So I hope this is one of many conversations. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I also want to highlight that tomorrow we're doing a deep dive into the future of upskilling AI adoption in workplace learning with Deloitte's Director of Work Transformation, Benoit. So we're super excited, and we'll share the link in this chat. And I just want to thank everyone for joining, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much.